Speaking of poor predictions, let's move on to the next headline, which is around, I guess, the whole healthcare sector, really, but specifically drug companies' ability to predict how much of a drug is going to be in demand, and also how their supply chain can react to sudden fluctuations in demand. Now, normally, this is not something that happens too aggressively because certain conditions and illnesses, they don't really spike unless they're infectious, right? So there were, of course, shortages of the vaccine. There were shortages of antivirals and antibiotics, all that kind of stuff. That makes sense. Infectious stuff spreads up and down. But when we're talking about kind of chronic illnesses, things like diabetes, you wouldn't expect there to be a sudden explosion of diabetes and the anti-diabetic drugs to all of a sudden need like a quadruple, tenfold increase in demand, right? Which is exactly what's happened here, where the drug Ozempic, which is a once-a-week injection that people with type 2 diabetes could take as an alternative to insulin, which is very common for type 2 diabetes because their blood sugar is going to sort of keep going up, and it goes up and down really crazily in response to different things that they eat. Again, insulin has a lot of other crossover effects that are difficult to manage on a day-to-day basis. So some people say Ozempic. Some diabetics say that Ozempic is a much more, once they get used to it, a much more manageable, more stable kind of...
it sounds really good.
So the headline is that there's a huge shortage of this drug. And again, it could be for a number of reasons, but it doesn't appear to be a spike in a number of type 2 diabetics in Australia. So this article was Australian specific, but I believe the shortage extends beyond Australia, right? Because all these...
worldwide, right?
Yeah. Very few of these drug companies are local to Australia.
That's right,
They're all based...
Very few,
US, Europe. Okay. There's a huge shortage, and it's gotten to a point where a number of governing bodies have had to make official announcements about this, right? Like that's when you know it's bad. Like when you got the official press releases from in Australia, the TGA, the Therapeutics Goods Administration, TGA, and so this is what they're saying. They're saying the reason that it's a short supply is because of off-label prescriptions. And you work with clinical research and clinical trials, so you probably know this a bit more than me. What do you think they mean by off-label prescription?
So basically prescribed for not what it's indicated to be used for treating, essentially, which my understanding in Australia at least is not, there's no legal issue with off-label prescribing. But I guess you want to keep in mind that perhaps the science or the research behind off-label prescribing may not be as rigorous as for on-label prescribing.
Right, because you have to actually go through the trials, right?
That's right. So it's a case where I think during the clinical trial, they actually saw a secondary effect of weight loss. So something that was seen during its, when it was being trialed for its initial indication for treatment. But now it's just been, I guess, kind of hijacked by social media, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's come about because online clout, and they're bragging that they've lost all this weight, and the influencer game. I'm also on TikTok. I'm very, very small following, and I couldn't influence a giant drug company supply chain. Let's just lower everybody's expectations here. The thing with TikTok in particular is that you can't predict who's going to see your video. Like the other platforms, there's more of a rhyme or reason to it. Like you kind
of
know.
You've had personal experience with that. You mentioned that it's just
so
very unpredictable.
So I made 2 videos back to back on TikTok. They're both about really nerdy specific things for my students. Like they're about how to make a protein gel, right? And to me, I've showed a lot of people, I talk about this at conferences, 2 videos almost identical, and one had 32,000 views, which again is not that much in the scheme of things, and the other one had 300 views. It just wouldn't budge. But qualitatively, they're identical. Like we've done all these analyses to say, hey, how many cuts are there? Is my face on it too much, or is the music different, or
how long is a TikTok clip?
At that time, there was a limitation of 1 minute. So you can't make it longer than 1 minute. And it's not the CinemaScope 16:9 ratio that we watch our movies in, or 21:9, however you want to see it. It's the 9:16 vertical video, right? And so it's designed to be like on the phone casually. It auto scrolls for you, right? So it goes to the next one for you.
I just think of, a student cramming for their exam. They go, I've only got 1 minute to learn this. Any longer is going to be an issue, but I can dedicate 1 minute to learning this fundamental skill that I'll need in the research laboratory.
But the thing is, like the algorithm rewards rewatchability. So the feature is that you make a loop where the last clip you play is the same as the first clip you play, or the last word you say follows on from, like it's like a palindrome of sorts.
Oh, okay.
So then when you rewatch it, you don't quite notice that it's looping, because it just seems like I'm saying the same sentence, like so you're kind of designed to make essentially a visual and acoustic palindrome, so that in a minute you're watching for like 5 minutes without realizing it.
Oh,
you know,
right.
'cause
Okay.
it
I
just
didn't realize that. Okay.
Right. So if you can do that, then I think that's what the
Well,
algorithm
it's tricking you into learning about
exactly.
pouring
But
a protein
I
gel.
have had students tell me like that I made like a 10-minute video on PCO and there was a 1-minute TikTok, and the students I found the 1-minute TikTok more useful. So who knows? Like, this is a brave new world.
Right.
Who knows? All that's to say, it has just this incredible influence in a very opaque black box way. Like, it's reaching people, and fitness or lifestyle influencers have said that this drug going off label has the drastic weight loss. They look and feel great, and then kind of people are either asking the doctors about it more and or doctors are recommending it more. I'm not sure what combination it is. It would probably be at the GP.
Both, I guess.
Probably a bit of both. The question for me is there's no laws against it, right? And presumably in this case it's pretty safe. Otherwise we'd be hearing not just about the supply shortage, but about all the people who are suffering severe side effects.
Well, I mean, the one thing about being approved for use for whatever indication is that it is known to be safe based on current best research that is known to be safe. And so then an off-label use is sort of an easier segue to make, rather than something that's, you can't just prescribe something that hasn't been approved. I guess the question then becomes who is the patient base that are being prescribed this? Are we talking about severely overweight patients who have other chronic health issues and need this? Are we talking about people who don't really need the drug and are sort of trying to get their hands on it for weight loss?
Yeah, and the closest parallel I can think of, which is on a different level, but it's the whole gluten-free craze, right? Where there are genuine people who are celiac, who if they have gluten, their whole insides get inflamed and they just feel terrible and they just legitimately can't do it. Versus those of us who maybe like to eat gluten-free breads or gluten-free things because we just feel like a little less bloaty, a little bit more energetic and it's a little healthier. And if you really want to dive into the weeds in that area of clinical diagnosis, pretty much after Crohn's and celiac, which is like a very specific serotype-based diagnostic tests, all of the other misery that is irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disease is really hard to reproducibly diagnose, right?
Yeah, it's its own kind of worms.
So it's a huge can of worms, and people with all sorts of legitimate gut issues, they can't get a proper diagnosis for it, and they find that eating gluten-free exclusively or going pure vegan or going full paleo, that's kind of fixed a lot of the issues that they're facing day to day. But then if the supply chain isn't there to mass produce gluten-free goods, which I think it is very much.
It's very much so. Yeah.
Very much so. Because I mean, there's money to be made, right? So it makes sense for it to catch up.
So much more than there used to be.
There's a lag, but there have been a few years where people with celiac diagnosable gut issues who can't eat gluten were really suffering.
I had a close friend growing up who was celiac, and just the availability of goods is so different to what's available now. I mean, you can go and buy a gluten-free donut. That wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right? That's a new chain that popped up in Australia.
Gluten-free bread wasn't that widely available. Lunches were rice cakes. Corn thins were a new addition. A couple. That was the exciting new addition to the sandwich realm.
This is a supermarket-based problem, right?
That's right.
Whereas we're talking about like a clinical problem with like prescription drugs
more on a severe scale,
for chronic illnesses. So at the end of the day, there's no legislating around this. Drug companies and big pharma are always criticized for their greedy capitalistic mindset.
It sounds like they just can't keep up in this stage.
So in this case, the capitalism and the need should be aligned.
Yeah.
But then they can't make those roads merge. So hopefully
it's back to hard to predict TikTok, right? But there are advertising regulations that in Australia you can't advertise prescription medication. So I don't know how much is being cracked down on Australian influencers, or I don't know. I don't know the case. It's a worldwide thing that seems to be going on, and people who want to find information on the internet are going to find it. I mean,
yes, and I'd be very surprised.
Not going to make much of a difference in this case.
I'd be very surprised if our advertising legislation can keep up with TikTok as well.
Exactly.
Right?
It's just not feasible.
Yeah, and the monetization there is just. I think initially no one on TikTok was making any money.
Okay, yeah.
And then people who were big on TikTok, because they could make those loop videos very effectively, the only way that they could get money from that was to try and move them over to YouTube with a clearer, more transparent monetization policy. That's a hard thing to do, right? Yeah. And now I think every platform, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, once you have a certain amount of following, you can get some monetization from it. So then that's definitely advertising. But
I think the health and wellness space is huge in TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. So regulations on these sponsored products or gifted products and recommendations.
Sure.
And I think that's been cracked down on in Australia. I mean, I think I recently saw sunscreen was a bit of an issue. So, say beauty influencers who were gifted sunscreens to test and give their opinion on were technically not allowed to do that anymore because it was considered that they were paid in some way for their promotion or review of the product.
No, all I'm hearing when you're telling me that is just a criticism of the genre of video I make, because I'm not getting any of this free sunscreen. I'm not getting in any trouble with the regulators. I'm not on anyone's radar. So I'm clearly making the wrong videos. The health and wellness is going to be the 2024 thing.
It's all in the protein powders and the...
Yeah, no one's going to take beef cake lessons from me. I'm sorry. I'm going to know my lane. Yeah, I'm going to know my lane.
No one's gifting you any sunscreen.
Yes. So the drug companies clearly, again, their capitalistic agenda or moral agenda is aligned with the demand in this case. And it seems like the side effects are very manageable, whether it be diabetics or weight loss. So it should be a feel-good story, right? This should have been like, hey, drug companies making this drug that has multiple purposes.
Yeah,
and
it's great
it should
for
be a great
type
story.
2 diabetes. It can help with weight loss.
But then it's now pitched as a zero-sum game of diabetics against people with body image issues, and the drug companies making money from everyone but not enough money. But how much money is too much money? It's just like it's a huge mess, right? Which comes to the idea that no one really knows anything, and it's really hard to make these predictions.
I thought I saw that a higher dose is actually, I think in the US, approved under a different name for treatment for weight loss. But I think that's not the case in Australia. So
the US regulatory environment is the wild west.
That's right.
But often once you have FDA, then everything kind of falls.
And so in this case, actually the same drug, just at a high dose. So.
But I think Australia is well renowned for its very strict regulatory environment. I think that's the perception. Whether it is for your specific area of work, I'm not sure, or anyone else's area of work, but that's the perception we have. And I think that's a good perception to have. I guess if you were a drug entrepreneur, not a drug dealer, I guess that's going to make you. If you're an entrepreneur in the drug space, let's say, then maybe Australia isn't a market you want to crack into, because it's
I'll
like
write
not
that on one of my next
drug entrepreneur
paperwork.
So if you're a drug entrepreneur, maybe this strict regulatory environment isn't to your advantage, but really for the consumer, it should be. But in this case, it seems like all the wires are crossed.
When I go through the airport, I actually put researcher or government employee or
something like that
on my forms, because I'm a little bit scared that if I write scientist, I'm going to be pulled out for some kind of drug screening.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense.
I don't know if it's a strange paranoia to have, but researcher I think is the one I normally
Right. When I was younger, I was very insecure about what to say, and because when you say scientist, the follow-up question is always like, on what? And
that's right.
That's the fear every PhD student has, having to explain what they research, right? So I was like,
and you're
paranoid.
going, do you have 2 hours?
Yes, and it's like you straight away start hating yourself because you don't care about what you do enough to explain, to make someone else care about
that's
it.
Right.
So
it takes too long to make them care about it.
I think I defaulted to saying, because like molecular biology or microbiology.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's quite specific.
That's pretty specific, right? I think at some point I just kind of just said biology, or I think I said cancer at one point, because one of the things I was studying was very vaguely related to cancer. Now that I'm teaching, it's a little easier to communicate, right? So
that's right. That one's easy.
Teacher is a little easier, but
Yeah. I also have this sort of secret fear that I'll have some kind of chemicals from the lab on my clothes that haven't washed out that they're going to pick up in the drug screening test. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff we work with is highly flammable.